This channel is supported by Truefire.
Well, what is this all about then? It's the Truefire Summer Music Festival. What I'm going to tell you about, you can get 1 month of All Access for just $1. The All Access, you can dip in and out of every single course on Truefire, so that's a really great way to get some awesome courses down you.
About 2 months ago, I made a video saying that I feel like the digital modelling singularity is coming. And yesterday, Rob Chapman said this.
And I really think we've got to the point now where it's peak product. It is digital product singularity is what it is. I mean, I'm coming up with that as I say it, but that's really what it is.
First of all, I wanted to say cheers to Rob Chapman for all that he's done over the sort of, is it 20 years at this point? It seems like that sort of length of time. Like, he's been a stalwart of the YouTube community, and I think he's kind of responsible for, in many ways, showing that this kind of gear demoing stuff was possible. You know, one of the first guys to do it. So cheers, Rob. And it's also reassuring to know that you can continue to do this stuff even if you're 50 now, which I think Rob is. So again, congrats to getting to 50, Rob. Not that far behind you. Right, so what I meant with this digital moddering singularity, come back to that in a sec, is that essentially what is happening is there's actually like a confluence of spec. And so even things like, I don't know, I don't have it with me right here, but like the Mooer stuff at this point like has things like capture built in, and things like even this tiny 60-pound piece of gear has the ability to run NAM captures. So what I was talking about was essentially that we got to this point where really like the differences in spec or features and all of that sort of stuff is becoming a little bit kind of difficult to determine. They're all, I think, made in eastern parts of the world, except for the Quad Cortex, which I believe is still made in Finland, right? I think that's right. So that does make that one interestingly different. But, you know, essentially they're all digital little pieces of gear. Many of them will share the same input chips. I think some of them are sharing the same processors as well. Texas Instruments tends to be the thing that most people use, I think, and Sharks and all that sort of stuff. I think there is still a huge gulf though, and also I don't think so. Robert, his video essentially was saying that he felt like digital technology is kind of peaked. I think, and I saw on Instagram there was one comment from a guy who's like tried this stuff and just, you know, went back because the ease of use, I think, is still a gigantic area where there are improvements to be made. And I think this is actually where this stuff like Mooer, HoTone, I think are actually sort of leading the charge in this regard, I think, because they've actually made some gear which looks a little less derivative and also works pretty well. Hot one is actually how you say it, isn't it, I think. So like the Ampero Stage is a really quite interesting unit, but even the best of those have like these frustrating limitations, whereas when you get to like a Fractal FM3 or an FM9 or a Line 6 Helix, it's the difference is this, right? With the Ampero stomp, the Ampero stage, I'm trying to think like, how would I gig this thing? Whereas with the Helix and the Fractal, it's like, well, they've made it so you can gig the thing. Like, there is a real difference, and sort of like 8 scenes on Fractal, or Helix with capacitive touch foot switches, where you just assign things to those foot switches, like with the touch of a button, you can assign another one, touch that button again. It's like instant stuff like that, which is really very different. And also things like signal routing, however you want to say it. So for instance, in the HoTone Ampero, you've got this grid, but it's actually kind of 2 processes separately. And so you can't actually do things quite as flexibly as you might be able to on a Helix. Although you've got like 12 blocks available, you've got like, there's all sorts of little weird idiosyncrasies that I find there's less of those with things like the Quad Cortex, with things like the Helix, with things like the Fractal stuff. Now, there's also a huge area, I think, still incoming, where we've seen glimpses of this with the Tonemaster Pro and with the Helix Stadium, what we've seen of that coming up, is that I think actually there is still a lot of work to be done in terms of, okay, someone's plugging into a digital piece of gear. What are the blockages that get them from, okay, this is the tone that I want to hear, to the tone that I'm actually hearing? Like, what is it that companies can do to help kind of bridge that gap? That is still, I think, a huge issue. This is, I think, what Capture with the Kemper has kind of solved, and that, the singularity aspect of this is really that you're going to then, because they can all do the same thing, you're going to make your pick based on what is actually ready to gig, and what is actually inviting, or what is actually inviting within the way that you want to interface with the instrument at home. And you'll be picking based on actual unique selling points again. Because you'll be thinking, right, well, if I buy a new X piece of gear, or if I buy a HoTone or something like that, is there a community behind them? Is there, people building presets for them? Is there the ability for me to quickly capture stuff or build presets around other stuff that I've seen? Are there people kind of making tutorials how to do stuff with these? These are actually, I think, when it comes to like a digital piece of gear, that really can make a bit of a difference, or quite a big difference, between choosing one device or the other, I think. And I will say as well, behind the curtain, it isn't the case that Line 6 are the best payers. So that's not been the reason I end up using a Helix most of all. I think especially these days, the reason that Helix I use most of all is because it interfaces, with the Helix native, and that's something that I use day in, day out. It's just so convenient, and to be able to build presets on a PC with that device still in the car, and then at some stage bring it to that device and know that it will work, as well as knowing that like HX Stomp will work for me live. I know how that thing works. I know I can use the interface on it. Things like snapshots, which other devices like from the Chinese realm like HoTone or Mooer are starting to get some of these elements, but they've not really done it in the same way. Boss have like bits and pieces like the assign parameters part of the assign, I think it's called assign. Still, Fractal, Neural, Line 6, I think still have the edge. Kemper as well, like it really well designed, that even 10 years later, it's 14 years now actually, isn't it? Where like actually as a gigging sort of entity, I think it's really difficult to beat that Kemper like floor thing, morphing on each preset, having, the performance pages and all that sort of stuff. It is, I think, still the case that there is a large edge and a large lead that Line 6, Fractal, Neural DSP, Kemper have on the other stuff like the Mooer, the HoTone and that stuff. So although the tone parts, if you A/B them, might be really pretty comparable, I think there are still huge differences in actually getting that unit on the floor, working with it, getting it to a giggable state. And I think Boss actually is kind of closer to, in my opinion, some of the other stuff, because I think a lot of the engineers are actually Eastern rather than... I don't know what difference there is really in that sort of side of stuff, but it does seem like Line 6, the Helix, that unit was like the first one where it's gone, right, we've really revolutionized sort of how the modeling device is going to look for the next 10 years, and even like Quad Cortex heavily borrowed from that. And now maybe we'll see the Helix Stadium kind of do that again, step things up another notch. But I do think there is still this lead that the other companies will have, and I don't know what would change that. And again, like I say, Mooer, HoTone or Hot One, these companies and Nuix do pay better than the Western companies in my experience. So that's kind of maybe part of why, you know, I'm happy to promote some of their gear and stuff like that, and Flammer even. And you do get pretty good bang for buck. But if I was thinking, right, I need to take this thing from the bedroom to the stage, it is still very clear in my mind what I would go for. And there appears to be no actual singularity in terms of getting these things totally giggable. Like, they've not really even got close, in my opinion, yet. So that's one big difference, I think, that still remains. I don't know if anyone's going to change that. But the other thing is that like things like the HX Stomp or the Nano Cortex really do mean that I'm not sure that I'd necessarily consider some of these other brands over like the non-flagship from Line 6 or the non-flagship from Neural DSP. Like, you don't have to spend £1,500 to be getting something that actually sounds the same as the £1,500 models, and that's kind of another part of this conversation which I think is kind of interesting. Like, if you don't need to be gigging these things, then they're still making products for people that are going to be playing at home that are actually sounding just as good, and they're using the same learnings as those other bits and pieces. So that's what I think is coming, like the singularity in terms of what each of these devices can do. You know, will they all have a tube screamer on there, all have, you know, multiple amps, and hopefully soon-ish all be able to do like the capture and profiling side of things. That is where the Chinese stuff actually still has the edge, I think, because Mooer, HoTone, Sonicake, they have managed to bridge that gap quicker. Like Line 6 with the Stadium are telling us they're working on proxy. Fractal, I don't know if Cliff is that interested in it anymore. And Neural DSP, of course, were the first, I think, to kind of bring this idea that modeling and capture could go together. That is the singularity that I was talking about. But I think there are still huge differences when it comes to actually using the gear. And something like the Tonemaster Pro, which kind of does something complex but also simplifies it, is, I think, like, and what we're seeing of the Helix Stadium is, I think, where we're going to see things shifting further, and we won't know whether things have peaked until we get there. Has the tone of the stuff peaked? I think, again, until you do like a specific A/B, it's not that clear. Did the pod actually sound pretty good? Does it still hold up today? In some cases where you're not using super high gain stuff, to be honest, it actually holds up really pretty well. So I just think tone has not really changed that much over the time. You know, like the feel of these devices changes. The other huge thing that I think is sort of missed a lot by these companies, they're talking about like how accurate and these things sound exactly like an amp recorded, but the experience of actually playing a modeler live or whatever couldn't be more different from actually playing through an amp. And I think this is something like the Fender Tonemaster amps that have come out. Those were, I think, about the best accepted modeling things. Maybe the Boss Katana, but there's still a huge gap, I think, between playing a modeler and actually having the thing that, like, that amp in a room feel that people are liking. And there's still this gap for companies like, I guess, Tonex with their cab have done something close-ish to kind of bridging this gap, where it's like they've got this amp feel thing or live feel, where it's like you turn it from a mic amp to a live amp, but it changes the mid-range a bit. I think there's still things like that, and maybe, you know, companies could be working on this idea like, well, I've made this preset in the bedroom, now transform it so that it's going to work for me live. I mean, whether that's at all possible, I don't know, but there is still, I think, a lot of work to be done before we can really say, look, digital modelling can't get better beyond this point. I think. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Cheers to Rob Chapman. Catch you in another video. Cheers.